everyone. Thank you for joining us. Please let us know where in the country or other countries you are that you're joining us from today as we talk with Dr. Mindy Waite about how words matter. We frequently, in the dog behavior world, we use words to help describe what actions and behaviors our dogs are doing. Not only do words or labels help to clarify what we're seeing and help as a shorthand verse, but it also colors how we might see a dog. So just like words matter when we're talking with people to describe them and speak with them, it matters just as much with our companions. So Dr. Mindy Waite, she went on a study to help research some of this and talk about it. So I am going to, hello Suzanne, thank you for joining us. I am going to bring in Dr. Waite here with us to tell us all about herself and the research that she's done that we're going to talk about today. So, hello. Thank you for
Hi,
joining
team.
us. Thank you. So let's start out with the amazing amount of education you have. Wow.
Oh,
I mean, just looking at your resume, I was like, holy smokes. So, and you
you're very
started out
kind.
with the micro world, which is also, is all obviously intertwined, but then you ended up working with behavior in dogs. So I'd love to hear about how you get started and evolved.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think the overarching theme of everything that I do is it turns out I love science, which I frankly never would have guessed back in high school. Like I did languages and I thought, oh, I'll be a translator someday. But in undergraduate, I took this genetics course and I just totally fell in love with genetics. So end of sophomore year, I switched over to genetics for undergrad and just sort of crammed everything in, which they said you couldn't do, but I don't know. When people tell me I can't do things, I like to do them, frankly. So I did genetics, and I was like, well, gee, what do you do with a bachelor's in genetics? There's not a lot to do with just a bachelor's. And so I moved on to a PhD in molecular biology, which was focused on mouse brain development at the University of Michigan. And that was the reason I did that is because A, I love science, and B, I love to use my science to help people. And so my goal at that point in my life was to see whether there were ways I could apply genetics to help people with medical disorders. Specifically, I was very interested in like Lou Gehrig's disease, or otherwise known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or similar disorders like that. But it turns out in graduate school, so there are two pieces to it. First of all, you can't get through mouse brain development without taking out a lot of mice, which I did not enjoy in any way, shape, or form. And I was like, this is not something I want to do long term. But the other thing is I volunteered at an animal shelter, the Huron Valley Humane Society in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I absolutely fell in love with working with the animals there. And so I was telling Jen before the show that I read a couple different books, one of which was good, some of which were not so good. And one of those was Patricia McConnell's The Other End of the Leash, which got me really interested in behavior. And then after graduate school, I decided I didn't want to do that kind of science, the molecular biology, and instead went and got a master's in behavior analysis at what started off as University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which is a great institution. And then my mentor moved to Marquette University. And so I now have that master's in behavior analysis, which I would love to get another PhD in. My husband says that that's a big no, but we'll see. Someday it could still happen. But frankly, that's the ideal combo for me. It's got the science behind it, and it's also got the ability to help people, but through behavior, which it turns out is something that I really love. It's delightful to be able, and I'm sure Jen can speak to this as well, to be able to apply science and behavioral principles to animals and to help. Frankly, you're also applying it to the owners there on the other end of the leash with those animals. And so it's kind of come full circle because many of the terms that we use in behavior analysis and in behavior are genetic terms, and they apply in much the same way. So like, for example, genes can go, or organisms, species can go extinct, and similarly behavior can go extinct. And it's all about the environment in which that organism or that behavior is expressed and whether or not it can thrive or die out. So it's kind of like this neat little circle that has happened from undergrad to now.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, like, I'm a certified applied animal behaviorist, but I also teach at UWM. I'm very lucky. I get to teach behavior analysis to their psych undergrads. And
Mhm.
so some of the students go on and they do behavior projects with human behavior themselves, smoking, exercising, drinking water, the usual important things. But a pretty large subset of students are very interested in, frankly, learning about the science of animal behavior as well. And so they change. One of their projects is to change then a behavior in their own animals. And so I'm very lucky that I get to teach this to like excited undergrads to appropriately engage with their own animals and change their behavior in generally force-free ways. That's what we focus on in the class for ethics purposes.
Mhm.
But then I also get to do some cool research, which is where sort of this came up.
Yeah. Well, that is really cool. I actually looked at some of the different classes and tracks of study at the University of Milwaukee when I noticed that you were there, and I was like, "Oh, cool!" So,
Mm-hmm.
how fun that you get to teach people that too, outside of guardians and their in directly in home. That you're bringing up the new crop of potential
Yeah.
dog trainers and consultants. That's fabulous.
Yeah, I feel so lucky to be able to do that. And just once again, like just how excited these students are. Like they have these animals, they love these animals. Some of the students want to increase behaviors that they really like, and some of the students, a lot of animals have problem behaviors. They want to decrease those, and so they'll often try to start off by saying, frankly, they try to go the easy route by saying, I'm going to use a punisher on this animal. Like it goes through the garbage, I'm going to, dump water on it or whatever. And we have some conversations about, the ethics of behavior and behavioral principles and what could work instead of the punisher, and what should we put in place to try first, and then how can we expand upon that. And they often find really quickly that like the the intervention that they had originally planned is A, not the most ethical, and B, probably not going to be the most effective long term either.
Right, right.
So
That's
it's fun. Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I first got interested in dogs, when I adopted my dog Mary Lou, and I was devouring like every book I possibly could, and I was like, maybe I want to, be a like Patricia McConnell because I lived in
Oh,
Madison,
yeah.
and and she was a professor there at the time, so I was like, what can I do? How can I become her? And I, saw all the different classes I would have to take that have nothing to do with behavior, and I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the hard parts about our industries is that there isn't a normal track for us. For so long, it had been, shadowing or mentoring with somebody, reading books, and some variety of different schools out there.
Yeah.
So it has been, I feel like, one of the reasons why we still have difficulty with getting regulation and getting people on board is because there's no easy, straight, I want to do this and go to school for
Yeah.
it.
So what I will say for those, I know we're slightly off topic, but for those people out there who are interested and you're like, how can I become the next Patricia McConnell? There are a couple routes for it. And Jen's absolutely right. Like back in the day, the route you would have to take. So Patricia was ethology, zoology were her specialties, are her specialties. I don't know. I said were. So yeah, you take a lot of like classes on, basic biology and probably some conservation and some ethology and some zoology and some genetics, etc. for sure. Nowadays, what I would recommend to aspiring people is if you take the behavior analysis route, that's what I would totally do again. Even though my mentor in graduate school works with children, which is what behavior analysis is typically applied to,
Mm-hmm.
there are mentors out there just like her who are interested in supporting people who want to do animal behavior. And so my thesis was totally animal based. And if you get the degree in behavior analysis, you'll have such a solid understanding of behavioral principles that are applied across species, like it won't matter. So what I will say is behavior analysis is a great way to go. The other option I'll throw out, and I don't know that much about it, but I should at some point. Erica Feuerbacher, she tells me it's said differently. I think she says it Feuerbacher, has an online master's now that is related to its behavior analysis for like animals. And she's out at
Colorado?
she's no, she's at, oh gosh, Virginia Tech. She's at Virginia Tech. So that's another thing to look into. And again, it's an online master's, so you can get it from anywhere, and it's very specific to applied animal behavior. So there are options out there now for people, which is kind of nice.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yes.
So
And who
awesome.
wouldn't want to be taught by Erica, right?
Right? Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
How fun. So with some of the so you've done a lot of research. You've got a lot of papers. And one of them was about taking and understanding the functional analysis of mouthing and
Mm-hmm.
biting and the labels that we use on it. I would love to hear more about that.
Yes. So I was telling Jen before the podcast again, we started some of these studies 4 years ago now. So research takes a little while. So that's why they're just sort of coming out at this point. And the first study that we did was a functional analysis, as she mentioned, of mouthing. The purpose of a functional analysis is, instead of hypothesizing, like, why is your dog engaging this behavior? What are the reinforcers in the environment that I think are causing it? The functional analysis empirically tells you these are the reinforcers in the environment, so that when your behaviorist like Jen comes in, she can say, I know exactly what the reinforcers are, and so my protocol will be aimed specifically at those. So it's as efficient as possible, so the owner's doing as little as they possibly need to, while also making sure it's really effective. The functional analysis is commonly used in human problem behavior.
Mhm.
It has been applied across animal behavior. I shouldn't say problem behavior. Animal behavior, and had been published a few times for other dog behaviors. And so for our mouthing study, we wanted to say, A, can the functional analysis be applied for dog mouthing behavior? And B, what are the functions of mouthing? Because no one's ever tested it. And C, can we develop function-based interventions for these owners? And so I don't have the data for that, but what I will say is the functional analysis worked. It did help us identify the functions of mouthing behavior. And then based on that study, we were like, okay, gee, we know subjectively, like based on the puppy classes I used to teach, that many owners say, my puppy mouth, like you raise your hand, or you say, all you puppy owners, whose puppy mouth's on them, raise your hand. And everyone just goes, me, like everyone in the room. And it's a very common question by owners
Mhm.
of like, how do I make it go away? And so we're like, okay, we think maybe we've solved that, but like, how common is it really? And what is mouthing? And so the second study that we did was looking to ask owners, essentially, does your dog mouth? Now, I'll bring this up in a second. Does your dog mouth? So how common is it? What does it look like? What do owners do about it? And it brought up a really interesting question, which we'll get to at the end, which is like, what is mouthing really? Because it turns out when you are asking owners to raise their hand of, does my dog mouth? And we were also interested in, does my dog bite? When you're trying to define those two things, it is surprisingly difficult to say that they are different. And we'll get to that sort of at the very end.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to share my screen. We're going to start with the initial data. Can you see that, Jen?
I can. Okay, so I'm just gonna.
Awesome.
Oh wait.
So this is just the second study that we did, looking at like how frequent is mouthing in dogs in the United States. And oh, it's gonna put itself on a timer here, so I'm just gonna make this bigger, of course. So what we did was, we knew there was a previous study that had suggested that like 38% of dogs engage in mouthing, and this was an Italian study, so it's totally different country. And I was like, I don't know if I think only 38% mouth, and I think like there's probably different age groups as a result of that.
Mhm.
And so what we had to do in order to figure out like what we think is going to be the frequency is we have to ask owners, does your dog mouth? Which first requires us to say like, how are we going to leave it up to owners to tell us what mouthing is, or are we going to define it for them? And so we ended up defining it for them for fear that we wouldn't know what owners were saying was mouthing. Um, and so we just said, if your dog's teeth or inner lips touch human skin or clothing and it doesn't include licking, that's mouthing. But you can already see the problem with this, right? When a dog's teeth or inner lips touch human skin or clothing, gee, a lot of people would say that's biting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be problem number one right there. But that's how we, you got to define it somehow. So that's how we started our study. There we go. And then, so we said, does your dog mouth? How old are they? What are their breeds, etc. And from that, we were able to draw out that, and this will be no surprise to you, Jen, I'm sure, that there are age correlations with mouthing behavior in terms of whether the dog is currently mouthing on their owner, whether they had ever mouthed but don't do it anymore, or whether they had never engaged in what we call mouthing. And as you can see, the younger the dog was, like 6 months, under 6 months, and 6 months to 11 months, like 80% of these guys engaged in mouthing on their owners. A whole bunch of them, like another 10 to 20%, previously mouthed, and very few had, the owner said, this dog's never mouthed on me. And then as the dogs get older, there's a decrease in what the owners called or what the owners determined was mouthing behavior based on our definition. But what I still find fascinating is that when you look at these guys who are over 60 months, so this is 5 years old, 25% of these guys are still mouthing on their owners. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty solid chunk. And overall, it suggests like, yep, we were right. Lots of young dogs do it. Lots of adolescent dogs, 50%, 60% still do it. But frankly, like these are the interesting guys, right? Like what is happening in their environment that is causing this behavior to maintain?
Right.
And that's probably where you get called in.
Yeah, for sure. Or with the puppies that people don't understand the difference between a puppy mouthing and a puppy biting. And they call me saying, "Oh my God, my puppy's aggressive. It's trying, it's constantly biting me and drawing blood. And I'm worried that it's going to grow up to be an aggressive dog." And it's just the light mouthing. Well, I know that I say light, but they've got little sharp teeth. And it really does hurt.
And that's an interesting point that we will definitely sort of apply at the end, but it's like, if you have a puppy who's putting their teeth on you, let's like, they're 10, 20 pounds and they're putting their teeth on you, you're probably way more likely to say like, oh, that puppy, the owner says he's biting, but he's mouthing. But if it's that same dog and it's now 100 pounds, it's engaging the exact same behavior. Suddenly you might not call it mouthing anymore, but the behavior hasn't changed. And so that's why this distinction that we think we have between like mouthing and biting, I think is very fascinating.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we also, as I had mentioned, we had asked people to say, not just does your puppy mouth or your dog, does your dog mouth, but what breed is it? Because I had some hypotheses, and to spoil the fun here, like the subpopulations of dogs were too small to do any statistical analyses on. So I cannot say like one breed mouths more than others based on our data. But I did find it fascinating, just from subjective experience, that so many of the doodle mixes appeared to currently mouth on their owners. And again, you don't know if that's genetics or whether it's, something about the environment that those dogs are in, but but they're again, no statistical significance performed here, but there are probably going to be some breed specific differences. And the reason we were really originally interested in this was because, we thought that the dogs who use their mouth more often, like retrievers, for example, might use their mouth more often on people as well. And that didn't really seem to be the case when you just eyeball the data. But the doodles,
shepherds.
Yeah, that was a little surprising too, frankly.
Yeah. I'm interested in where did you solicit for people? Because obviously the doodles maybe were more popular in a certain population versus another dog in a different area of the country. So.
Right. Yeah. So the way we solicited it is joined a whole bunch of dog groups that I would never join in real life, that were as general as physically possible. So things like, Chicago Dog Lovers Group, and I Love My Dog, and dogs are the best. Like, just these super general groups that just, post like just the most bland dog things. And we specifically did that because we didn't want to we didn't want to get an overabundance of certain breeds like on accident, and we purposely avoided also like any specific age group Facebook groups. Like, we didn't want to get seniors, because obviously if older dogs are less likely to mouth, then that would skew your data a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Although I guess we did have the age. And we also specifically avoided any groups that were like, my dog has a problem behavior, because that would clearly skew the data.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. And then, I'm glad we collected these data, because I don't know about you, many owners sort of say like, is my young dog who's putting their teeth on me, like, is that normal? Just like you had sort of said, is he going to be is this an indicator that he's going to be aggressive when he's older? I'm concerned. As I've shown you, like, what we call mouthing is pretty common when they are young, and it typically offsets, similar to the previous data, somewhere under like 1 year. So of the dogs who actually stopped engaging in mouthing behavior, around 70% of those were under a year, and another 30% stopped mouthing when they were over a year, and then you saw another 25% never stopped mouthing. So if your dog has not stopped mouthing by like a year, maybe a year and a half, then, I mean,
That's who they are.
then it's probably, yeah, well, that's probably time to bring in the big guns at that point.
Yeah.
Although I hesitated to say that, because the earlier you can intervene, as you and I well know, the easier that behavior is going to be to reduce.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, I also explain to owners too that, some dogs use their mouths more than others for things,
Mm-hmm.
just like some dogs bark more than other for things. And it's very similar to us as humans. Like, some people are like hand talkers, and they're like, woo, moving all around and all kinds of stuff, or they're all about being super huggy. It's more about, for them, what would they prefer for their lifestyle, and how can we modify it, and what is, letting them know what's normal. Because if it's a dog, a big dog who's mouthing, who's just putting their mouth on but not putting any pressure, it's like, yeah, like that should be okay, as long as the owners are okay with it. The dog's not doing any damage. So I always kind of give them the human examples of how they're all different personalities too.
Yeah. But again, very contextual, right? Because let's say you've got a dog who's putting a big dog. Let's go for the big guns here. You got a big dog, and you're playing tug, and the context is really light, and the body's real loose, and the tail's moving real good, and like there's a long history of playing tug, and like the dog puts its teeth on the owner just real light, and the owner's just delighted because that's part of their like repertoire together, like. That's cool and that's kosher. But that same dog, let's say they're, obviously they're real stiff. They've got some big eyes. They have a bone near them, and they put the exact same amount of pressure on the owner's skin. Again, same behavior,
Mm-hmm.
but very different interpretations of whether that behavior is potentially acceptable or not by the owner.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, again, I find it so interesting to say, like, well, one is mouthing and one is biting, but it's like, how do we tell the difference between the two? And we will definitely get more into that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Um, and then the other piece that was really cool about this is we said to owners, when your dog engages in this behavior, like, why do you think they're doing it? And the majority of owners, about 42% or 40% ish, said they do it because they think the dog wants their attention, which I think wouldn't be horribly surprising based on our functional analysis study that we did, which just had an N of 3 dogs. Attention was a component for all 3 of those dogs, and they were all pretty young dogs too. So attention, probably a pretty good guess. Interestingly, 60% said that they thought that the mouthing was the purpose of the mouthing for their dog was to reduce their arousal. So for something like the owner walks in the door and the dog is just so excited that they put their mouth on the owner and that helps them somehow calm down. I don't know what I think about that, frankly. I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah.
Possible?
Well, arousal has been sort of a theme for the past 2 years with trainers, and so it maybe they hear the word a lot, and it's something they
Maybe.
just kind of grasp onto as to help to try to explain something that they're not quite sure they know what the answer is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what they're trying to say, but again, I don't know exactly what the function would be. I think what they're trying to say is the dog's just really excited and that's the context in which the owner gets mouthed on. I just don't know what the function I don't know that the function to me would be like it reduces the dog's arousal. I would hypothesize that it's again an attention component like again the owner walks in the door, the dog is super pumped. You work with separation anxiety dogs and sometimes I would say they fit into this category of like they're just hyper aroused when the owner comes through that front door.
Hmm.
And a good chunk of those dogs will sort of put their mouth all over their owner. I don't know if that reduces the arousal or if it's really just to say like you're home and I need your attention,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't know. We have nothing to back that up. So,
Right.
um, and then another 13% suggested that the dog's trying to get some sort of tangible item, like they're trying to, get some sort of chewy or treat or toy. Another 10% said that their dog was trying to escape something. So I think some owners said something like, "I tried to clip my dog's nails," and so they mouth me, which I find very interesting. Um, yeah, because then you're like, oh, is that biting or is that mouth? And then we don't. How do we define that? So we'll get back to that. And then some owners said that they think it's automatic in that the dog is trying to tug on something. Like if the dog just had something else to tug on, they would tug on that, but there's nothing else to tug on, so they tug on the owner, and it's not to get attention. It's really just to like get their jollies off like by tugging on something, which could be. And 18% said they thought there were other functions. And then the fascinating part, which is not related to how we'll define mouthing per se, but is we asked owners, what did they do if your dog mouths on you? Like, what do you do about it? And 60% of owners said that they say no or they warn their dog, which just kills me. It makes me like it warms my heart a little bit because if you've got 40% of people saying my dog does it for attention and I tell them no, like you couldn't reinforce that better. I mean, so that's just delightful to me. Uh, and another 50% said they provide a tangible, so the dog mouths on them. And then, you hear this commonly, Jen, I'm sure. Give them something more appropriate to chew on. So the dog mouths on you and you're like, don't do that. And you give them a chewy. Well, I would argue for dogs for whom tangible is a reinforcer, a tangible object is a reinforcer, you certainly could reinforce that behavior, which could be problematic. 25% people said they walk away. 24% said they push their dog, which again, what a delightful form of attention for these dogs. Let me tell you. 23% said they tried to ignore the dog, which can be challenging, but good for them. 13% said they tried to block the dog. And another 12% said they put it in a crate or in a separate room, which obviously could be a form of punishment per se. So owners do a variety of things, and they think their dogs are doing it for a variety of reasons,
And this
which
is
I
when,
find, yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but this is when they think their dog is mouthing versus when they think their dog is biting.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So we did ask people, and I don't have these data in here. We did ask people, does your dog mouth? Yes, historically or no. And we also said, does your dog bite? Yes, historically or no. And for the purposes of the study, we contextualize bite as saying, like, is your dog does your dog put your teeth on you, but in the context of like growling, snapping, snarling? Like we had to contextualize it for them.
Hmm.
And it seemed like when we divided it up topographically like that, owners were pretty capable of discriminating or thinking that they discriminated between mouthing and biting. But we didn't do any analyses other than tug for biting. we were specifically interested in that because, there's sort of like these old wives' tales about like if your dog plays tug, it's more likely to bite you, or
Yep.
dogs who play tug are more likely to bite. And so we specifically wanted to address that, and we did not see a correlation, which should not be a surprise to anybody. But you are spot on. That's a long way of saying, yes, all of these are solely mouthing.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And so what we had concluded from this is, again, that mouthing is very common in dogs. It does continue into adulthood in a sizable subpopulation of dogs. And frankly, some owners said they loved it. So that's probably why it continues. Like some owners said, I play with my dog and they put their mouth on me and like, it's a fun game and it's how we bond. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. And we found that mouthing occurs across a variety of breeds, and that the owner's behavior, although they could hypothesize what the potential functions of mouthing were, the owner's behavior didn't necessarily target those proposed functions. So like we did even like a micro analysis of if an owner said, I don't like my dog's mouthing. I think my dog is mouthing because they want attention. Does the owner then ignore the dog? No. The owners said no and shoved the dogs. So what we found was that the owner's behavior, was not in line with the functions that they had proposed for reducing the problem behavior, which of course is just the kicker to say, if you're an owner out there and your dog is engaging in what you think is mouthing behavior, it is never a bad idea to bring in a professional as early as you can. Is what I feel like I could conclude from that.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to make these bigger because I don't have a timer on these slides. So Jen, this is where I think all of that's cool. I love those data. I'm super pumped to get those published at some point. But again, when I was trying to define mouthing versus biting for these owners, I was like, everyone thinks they know what biting is. I think I know what mouthing is. I think I know what biting is. You think you know what mouthing is. You think you know what biting is. But do we agree? And I'll to skip to the punchline, I think the answer, frankly, is no. Mm-hmm. And so this is why the words that we use, I think, are fascinating and important. And I think, to me, like, we in the behavior world, we argue about things like reactive and arousal. And frankly, I'm not a fan of those words, although I do use them a lot just to converse with owners. But I think biting versus mouthing is like the thing we should really be talking about, because biting will get a dog killed, right? Mm-hmm. Like biting has so many legal repercussions for owners. And I have some really interesting like local data. Jen and I are in like the Wisconsin sort of Milwaukee area. I have some data that I think will be very interesting to you to like really highlight why this is so important. But we don't agree on biting and mouthing. And I say that because when you're thinking of discriminating between two labels, biting and mouthing, you can discriminate based on the topography of those behaviors, so they look different, or you can discriminate based on the function of those behaviors. So the function meaning like they are maintained by different reinforcers. So let me give you some examples. So mouthing versus biting, topography. You could say, well, biting is where the dog breaks skin. Well, I would argue I've seen some mouthing cases where I've seen broken skin.
Yep.
Big bruises. I've been mouthed on. I'm gonna keep using quotes because like I'm using these words like I know what they mean, but I don't. I've been mouthed, like I have a client right now, a young dog who mouths in places like you do not want to be mouthed. And let me tell you, if this dog mouthed on a person who didn't know it, they would say this dog bit me. Mm-hmm. Like, so the two look the same to me. And you could say, well, biting occurs in the context of other behaviors, like the dog would be stiff or growling or lunging, like we did for our survey. But that's not always true either. Sometimes the bite comes out of nowhere. And so I don't think you can discriminate based on the parallel behaviors either. And so I'm very open, like Jen or people who are on the Facebook feed, I'm very open to, if you can think of like a 100% way topographically to discriminate biting from mouthing, like I'm super open to that. I just haven't figured it out yet. So what do you think on that?
Oof. I don't know. I guess for me, I think a lot of it would end up being the context of the situation, um,
Mm-hmm.
and taking the overall picture into play. So basically, how you described it for the owners. Did it accompany growling and snarling? Does your dog have a bone? I ask frequently a lot, like, how were you arranged in the environment? Were you hovering over your dog? A lot of dogs have body handling issues that people don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Really digging into, like, what was going on when your dog did this to help me determine, is this dog upset or not? Did this dog do this because it was just having fun? Or did the dog do this because they genuinely wanted space and this was their last resort for whatever reason? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess that's how personally when somebody reaches out to me, how I would dig in to help me to determine if the dog was quote unquote mouthing or
Mm-hmm.
biting. But yeah,
Right.
I've
And
certainly had some dogs mouth me that I was like, dang, like you just left the biggest bruise on me, and
right,
it's going to be like a week before I heal from that. But
right.
everything else that the dog was doing was like just having fun, and they just happened to jump up and grab me, and they're like, haha, the rest of their body told me they were totally fine.
But
So
it's interesting because the second piece to this, the other way you can differentiate behaviors is based on the function. So why is the dog doing it? And it's interesting because your description had both of those pieces. One is like, so what does the dog look like? And if you maybe can't use that, then you sort of fell back on like, why is the dog doing it? Like, are we in play? Is this like some sort of component of a play behavior together, or is the potential function that the dog wants you to go away? And so that's the other way I think we could attempt to differentiate between these behaviors, is to say mouthing and biting have different functions. Mouthing is a part of play, and the purpose is like maybe to get attention or to get a toy from you. Whereas maybe you could say like biting is the function of that is to gain access to like distance. Like, I want you to go away from my bone, or I want you to go away from my crate, or like, I don't want you to touch me that way.
mhm.
But have I seen dogs who did this? I have seen dogs who do this. And there's a really cool book called, oh God, it's by John Wright. It's called The Dog Who Would Be King. And he has a fascinating story in there of a German Shepherd who would bite his owners. So the owners were pretty nervous, and he would do this in order to get like pets and treats from them. And so I would argue that based on a dog's learning history, it is entirely possible for a dog to put punctures in a human's arm in order to gain access to like attention and treats. And so I also have problems because of that, saying like 100% of the time, like I can discriminate it based on function, because I don't know that I can. And so that's why I think it's so important that we as a community understand that like we don't have really solid ways of differentiating between these two behaviors. um, Even though people feel very heartfelt and very emotional ways that they know exactly what biting versus mouthing is. But the conversation you and I just had is kind of like, well, you have to look at this and look at that, but you're kind of hypothesizing, and sometimes what I think it all comes down to is like, how much damage is the dog doing?
Mhm.
Um, but that doesn't stop owners from, of course, being nervous about a dog who is growling, snapping, snarling to get you to leave its bone, and it's not putting any punctures in at all. So this is why I just wish there was more conversation about this. And the reason I think this is so important, we talked about these. The reason I think this is so important is uh, because, again, there are legal ramifications, and not even that, there are relationship ramifications, as you mentioned, between owner and dog, depending on how they view or how the dog is labeled and its behavior is labeled. this was a study that came out in 2019. I think it was in the UK, and it asked owners to self-identify as like bite victims. And it gave a variety of different statements of like, if a dog did this, would you say that it had bit you? Yes or no? And it went from like really just obnoxious behavior basically to like horrifically multiple bite incident behavior down in 1G. And what they found was, I mean, as you go through these statements, basically more and more people, here's your percentage of people who said, yep, I would constitute that as a bite. That number kind of increases. But even if a dog is just obnoxious and they didn't even make contact by teeth, like 3% of owners or 3% of people who had been bit said, I would count that as a bite. Dogs who only made contact with clothing but didn't make contact with skin, 45% of these people said, yeah, that's a bite.
Wow.
Skin contact by teeth, I know, but no puncture, but there's bruising. 62% said, yep, that dog bit me. And then I highlighted this because, like, to me, this is like, wow, skin contact by teeth and bruising, but no puncture. Oh, this was no bruising up here. So this is just like the dog put its teeth on you and there's like some bruising. And 80% people said, yep, that dog, the dog bit me. And to me, this paper was like the highlight of, yes, this is what I have been saying. We don't agree. And it's, again, the other thing is the context, right? So if you've got this dog who is like having a great time, like it puts its teeth all over you, and you're like, yeah, this is our relationship and I love it. And then this dog, because of its learning history, does the same thing to someone who does not know it, is like, maybe slightly uncomfortable around dogs, or is one of these people in one of these categories up here, they're going to say your dog bit them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I personally don't have a problem with dogs putting their teeth on you when you're playing, if like you're kosher with that. But again, what I'm saying is, if we're going to label that a bite so that some people say it's a bite and some people don't, like, that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I know.
Certainly is. Uh-oh. There we go.
No, I'm just going to stop sharing here for a sec. And
Okay.
so let me just take you back to some of the local legal pieces. Can you see me, Jen? Is that okay?
Yep, I can see you.
Okay. So I'm just looking at some of my documents here. So I live in Fox Point, Wisconsin, and just 15 minutes north of me, there is a municipal code in Mequon, Wisconsin, which indicates that, quote unquote, no person shall own or keep a vicious animal. And a vicious animal is defined as one who, quote unquote, bites, claws, or attempts to bite or claw any person, or bites or injures another animal. Doesn't say what a bite is.
Mm-mm.
And it says, as a result, if your dog is a vicious animal, so it has bit or tried to bite someone, it must be euthanized or moved out of the village.
Yep.
That's horrifying. And similarly, the city of Milwaukee ordinances have a special requirement for dangerous animals. And they say if your dog bites, it's a dangerous animal. But again, they do not define what a bite is. And so this again comes back for me, like, we need to be really thoughtful about at some point, we need to talk about what's a bite and what's mouthing. Like, we as professionals need to agree. And then we, I think, need to help legislators agree, because I'm very troubled by the data I just showed you and the ordinances I just read.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to safely combine those two things.
Yeah. It's so hard. I don't know if you've had to help anybody whose dogs yet who've done the biting and then gotten a citation, and then they're trying to do everything right, and they're calling their different community members that says call this, call that. They gotta show up for a court date, and like nobody knows any of these answers to anything, and they have to install like 8-foot fences and like all kinds of other things, and their dog has to be like one community, I think Wauwatosa, your dog has to be in a muzzle then anytime it leaves your property. But like you said, the bite, it was not defined as far as what this dog did or didn't do, and I just, my heart breaks for these people, and the people that have the ability and are willing to make these changes is wonderful. But not everybody can do that. They just can't,
Right.
and then that's when they end up in the shelter or just euthanized, and that's
Right.
hard. Yeah.
Right. And it's sort of like you mentioned, a lot of it depends on totally on the context. Because, like I said, some of these behaviors totally acceptable within the confines of the family, and yet you leave that and totally not acceptable. Or, as you and I have I'm sure worked on quite a bit, you've got a dog who will bite, will break skin, and the family's totally capable of managing that in that particular environment. And if the dog were to leave that environment, then obviously that's going to be much more problematic. Or certain other families maybe aren't capable of either managing it or enforcing the law required environment.
Mm-hmm.
So it is problematic. And you've got the dogs who do the damage on one end of the spectrum, and then you've got the dogs who are like wildly playful and soft on the other end of the spectrum. My major concern are these dogs like in this gray area, because what do we as a society do with that? um, so that's something I think professionals need to think about more. And of course, the it's always interesting when you talk with owners, right? Because again, they're not going to agree on what's a bite and what's a mouth. I've had owners come to me and their first form says, I want you to come help me with my mouthing dog. And then the next email is like, and this dog has bitten several people and broken skin. And you're like, wait, which dog am I working with here? So I think sometimes, not only do we disagree potentially on like the difference between these two terms, but I do think they are sometimes used as a function of the owner's behavior to cover for what the behavior topography actually looks like.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think I've had that happen a couple times, and I think it's out of embarrassment or not knowing what to
Mm-hmm.
do. They want help, but they think people won't help them if they tell the truth. Um, yeah, that's tough.
And you don't want to use the word bite, right? Like
Right.
the moment
Yeah.
you use the word bite, you're like, well, now I'm admitting that my dog bites, and like per these ordinances, like I now have a problem.
Hmm.
I mean, I totally get that. Like, why would you ever use that word?
Right.
Especially if it's not defined. So the other terms I think we need to think more carefully about in general are like the reactivity and the arousal. But like my pet peeve is really truly this space of the biting versus the mouthing. So I'll stop there for a second. Has anyone submitted any questions? So I'll be thoughtful about those if they have.
Yeah. So let's see here. So Jennifer's asking, so let me put this one here.
Yes, I will share that with Jen. That one is fully published from 2019. That team has done 2 studies, and this is the second of the 2, so I'll give her both. It's an easy read. You guys will love it.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, and let's see here. Here's a good example of differences between what a bite is.
So people are so nervous. Yep. A Pomeranian bit Kenny during a house call for plumbing. Oh, poor guy. Broke skin through his jeans, and the owner insisted it wasn't a bite. Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm sure, again, because we don't have solid definitions, like if it's a big dog, it's probably way more likely to be termed a bite. And if it's
Yep.
a small dog, less likely. Absolutely.
Yep. Yep. For sure. For sure.
And again, that's not really fair to those bigger dogs either. Like if you've got a small dog, let's say you've got an old dog who's got no teeth and it couldn't possibly break skin, but it's like totally lunging and guarding but just because it topographically cannot break skin, I would argue wouldn't classify it in the mouthing category.
Mhm. Yeah. And I feel bad for the little dogs whose people who think that yes, my dog could, oh, whatever, it's a little dog, it couldn't hurt, it couldn't bite you. I feel like those dogs frequently, continually get put into those situations where they feel the need to bite, because they're
Hmm.
so little and it doesn't matter. But if you've got a 125-pound dog that does that, you're going to be much more careful with your
Yeah.
dog. and most likely not be putting them in those situations because of the potential legal ramifications for it. But a
Right.
dog bite's a dog bite. It still hurts. Yes, the bigger dog could do more damage, but man, if you've ever been bitten by a dog, it hurts. It doesn't
Yeah, that's
matter.
a good point. I didn't think about that, but you're spot on that the little dogs are real like I make fun of the little dogs all the time, but like they're really put in hard positions because
Mhm.
people just can't help themselves. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
That's the nicest way to put that.
Right, right. So I'm interested in what do you want to do after this with this study? Where do you want to take it? Like action items or different next step studies so that you can start potentially reaching out to different communities who have these crazy labels that aren't defined and how it can help the community.
That's a really good question. I started a paper back like 3 years ago that sort of incorporates some of these data to, it's more of a position paper, frankly, to say like, here's what these data show. We don't agree on this. It's got major legal ramifications. And in general, like as a whole, we professionals and I would argue owners and legal entities or regulatory bodies need to operationally define every behavior that we're working on. And this, some of you have probably heard Susan Friedman talk. I don't remember the exact word that she uses, but she's like, a label is just that. It's just a label for a behavior. It doesn't define the behavior. You can call like, you could take what someone else calls a bite and you could call it like schmoopity schmoop. And as long as you operationally define it, people will know exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't matter what you call it. And
Hmm.
so that paper, which at some point I will get out, although I'm on to other studies at this point, that paper argues that like everybody who is working on behavior really should be operationally defining it
Hmm.
every time you work on it. And so like if and I will admit I fail at this a little bit myself and I need to get better at it. But what I really should be doing is when I'm going in and working with an owner on whatever the behavior is, I should be telling them, here's my definition of this behavior. Here's exactly what it looks like so that, you can identify when it's occurring. In theory, they should be measuring it so that they know the intervention is in place. Um, but if I'm not defining it for them and the owner and I don't agree, like we're going to have a problem in terms of our intervention. So
Yep.
I think every person who's a professional working on behavior should be operationally defining every behavior they're working on with their clients. And then I think when we're chatting with other professionals, we shorthand it a lot, right? We say that dog's reactive or like that dog's highly aroused. I don't know. I don't know how much good that does us. I think we should be operationally defining like even amongst ourselves instead of attempting the shorthand because we're probably not picturing the same behavior, frankly.
Hmm.
Um, and then somehow, and this is where I fall flat because as a researcher, we are not that good at touching regulatory bodies, I think. But I would also push for like, that's fine, I guess, that Mequon has that ordinance, but I do think that they need to define what a bite is. Like, it means, teeth have pierced skin or teeth have touched skin or whatever it is, they really need to write it down. Same for Milwaukee. We've got a ton of dogs in Milwaukee. You can't have non-defined bite behavior in a city this big. Like to me, that's a little bit wild.
Hmm.
But am I going to take on the city of Milwaukee? Um, Probably not. Probably not. Uh, and then the other piece is we've already sort of moved on to another really interesting research project, which maybe someday I'll come on and we'll talk about, which is looking at developing a preference assessment for owners so that they can identify like what are the order of preferences for my dog regarding their foods. Uh, I won't go into it too much, but let's just say so far the owners are surprised about which foods their dog prefers versus not prefers, which I think is really cool. And we talk a lot about like high, medium, low value foods and like when you would use those in training. And so this really identifies for you like where those foods sit on your personal dog spectrum. But
Yeah.
that's not related to this, except to say, like, if you were to use treats, if you were to use treats for an intervention for mouthing behavior, then it might be relevant. But
Yeah. Good, good. We got another question here.
Oh, do you think we will ever be able to operationalize the word bite across the board? And uh, I would like to say yes. I would love to say yes. In theory, it really should not be that hard, right? But as humans, for some reason, we are so attached to what we think is right. And I think I saw a paper recently that asked professionals to define, it was either separation anxiety or reactivity. And the agreement was what you would think it would be, which was not. And people were very passionate about how they defined whatever that label was. But and of course, the other problem here is who's going to define it, right? Is it going to be, APDT? Is it going to be the CABs? Is it going to be IAABC? Is it going to be the veterinary behaviorists? That's part of the really unfortunate issue, I think, is that I don't know that currently there's a lot of relationships between the different organizations, which is super unfortunate because I think we are totally capable at some point of agreeing on what a bite is. And frankly, we need to agree on that.
Yeah. It would
But no
be
one talks about it. That's the other thing is I've never heard anyone say gee, I don't know if that was a bite or a mouth.
yeah. Yep. Oh, really interesting stuff. Well, I hope somebody does take all of your hard
Yes.
work and does use it to start helping communities. Because I have yet to find one that I've lived in that clearly defines it. And the only reason I look at these things is because I've been a pit bull terrier owner. So immediately I am
Right.
all about protecting myself, making sure my dog is the best dog it can be, that I'm not putting it in situations. I don't go to the dog park. There's all kinds of things I don't do because I'm a pit bull terrier owner. Like I don't ever leave my dogs out in the backyard by themselves. I just never have. So, and then, maybe it's just I'm overly protective or crazy about it, but I guess I've just dealt with so much prejudice of having a pit bull terrier and knowing, having worked in a shelter, that immediately they're going to be the ones who are blamed for things that I know too many city municipalities regulatory things that just aren't clear. And yeah.
Right.
So it would be
Right.
nice for that for people. So
Right.
hopefully. Good. I never thought about this. Thank you so much for sharing it. Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're so welcome. Anytime I get a chance to prattle on about our research, I am thrilled to death. So,
Awesome. We'll definitely have you back again. You choose another topic and we'll talk about it. It's really
okay.
tons of fun. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. We went over the half hour. I should just start putting down an hour for guests because we always end up talking longer than 30 minutes. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to do that for us and with us.
You're so welcome. Thanks, team, and I'll get her that paper.
Okay, awesome. I'll share those links so everybody will have them later. Okay, thank you
Bye, guys.
and bye. Okay, so, oh, it's choosing the wrong camera for me. Okay, so next Monday it is the first Monday of the month, so it's going to be open Q&A. So do send in your questions to let us know what you want me to talk about so I can help give you pointers and tips and overview of reasons why your dogs are doing the behaviors they're doing and what we can do to help them. And then after that, the next guest is going to be Carly Brown, who is going to be talking with us about board and train. This is a frequent question I get asked about from people who are inquiring about training services, saying, hey, can I just take my dog to board and train and have this fixed? Well, for some stuff, yes, but the problem with dog training being an unregulated industry is that it's, I'd say, even more unregulated when it comes to board and train. So you really have to know what to look for and what truly trainers can help you with in a board and train situation. So Carly Brown is going to join us to talk all about how to be a smart shopper when it comes to board and train. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching and joining us live, and to everybody for watching the recording and joining us on our Mondays. Thank you and have a good night.